BIMCO's found that strong export growth from Asia into Africa, South America, and Europe. I've talking to some of my sources, and they say, there's a bit of decline recently, but trades to and from Australasia have been holding up quite well. Is this all exporters, or I don't know, we use that phrase, cargo finds its way. Is that what we're seeing here, right? The Trans-Pacific is soft and these other trades have taken off. Is this lower value goods being pushed to markets that can still afford them? Is this dumping? How do you see
Yeah,
this?
but
What's going
yeah,
on?
I wouldn't necessarily call it low value. I'd rather say it in terms of you have a lot of goods that's being produced in China. If suddenly a substantial part of that is no longer being exported to the US, obviously the manufacturers will look for other outlets. And that has been driven some of the growth. There are a couple of ways to then look at it. You could either say, okay, this is a temporary effect that whenever the US comes to their senses, it will go back to the US. I would tend to read it differently to the degree where suddenly, more or less again, from one day to the next, you can redirect a lot of these goods to other trades. That shows that there was an underlying unmet demand in South America, in Europe, in Africa, in all these places. That demand clearly must have been there all the time. So I'm not necessarily sure you're going to see a massive decline subsequently. Why would you?
So from a liner point of view, then they've accidentally discovered growth markets because the exporters have found out there is a market beyond the US. Is that what you mean?
That's partly what I mean. And from a lineup perspective, I mean, you were mentioning the BIMCO assessment about 5% growth. I would tend to be aligned with that. If you look at the some of the latest stats, global demand growth is 5%, but it's bifurcated. North American volumes are declining. Sure, you can find a few weeks where they were spiking, but overall during the trade war, they are down, where the rest of the world on average has actually grown 6%. So it's also been very clear over the last 4 or 5 months, most of the world shows strong, sustained growth. Basically, only the US that shows this weakness, and of course, let's tell completely.
What trade has surprised you most in terms of that growth this year?
Probably the ones to Africa, because in some of the stats there, you're looking 20% 15-20% growth. So from a
This
growth
into places
perspective,
like
that
Nigeria, isn't it? It's really been
yeah,
taken west that West African region.
exactly. So from a growth perspective, that is clearly large place. Now, mind you, from an absolute volume perspective, of course, Africa is not that large. So it's not a matter that you can suddenly send 100 big ships over there, but definitely surprising on the upside.
Okay, thanks, Lars. Plenty to chew on there. If you're on YouTube or Spotify, you can now see the Asia Europe spot market courtesy of Freightos. Again, it looks like free fall. Sorry to use the same word again. This is despite a lot of capacity being tied up traveling around Southern Africa instead of via Suez. Demand has been reasonably strong, and we've also had a fair amount of congestion, which has sucked up capacity. So, Lars, with all of those countervailing factors, what do you see going on that Asia Europe trade? We're now hearing about rates into North Europe from Asia edging below $1,000 per TEU, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. First of all, I'm not sure I would use the word free fall. I would cast it in a slightly different light because we tend to compare to what we see in 2024. And 24 was extreme. If it hadn't been for the pandemic, this would have been the most extreme year ever. The expectation coming into 25 before any of this played out was actually that rates in 25 would be significantly lower than 24, but still much higher than 23 and also higher than the pre-pandemic period. That's exactly what happened. And the reason for that was during 24 coming into 25, we had global fleet grow about 10%. So 24, we had not enough capacity. We could barely make ends meet going around Africa. And it was clear coming into 25 that problem would be solved, which is exactly what happened. And sure, have rates gone down in recent weeks? Absolutely, they have. Have they on the SCFI? They've gone below the $1,000 per TEU. You can either say that fine, that's exactly the same level they were at just before the Red Sea crisis broke out, but that would again be slightly misleading because in the 6 to 8 weeks prior to the Red Sea crisis, the carriers had actually pulled capacity in order to increase rates. Rates were bottoming out a lot lower than $1,000 prior to the Red Sea crisis. So I would tend to see Asia, Europe, not as in free fall, but as normalizing to the degree we have the capacity. It's normal to go around Africa. We don't have the excess capacity anymore. That's how I would tend to see what is playing out right now.
So normal is $1,000 per TEU. Is that what we're saying? Is that a factor of the global supply and demand
It, it, it,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, it's the impact of a supply and demand. How much capacity is soaked up going around Africa? That's a little bit measuring elastic band by the meter. You can get a lot of different numbers, but it's not unrealistic to say 10 to 12%. But since the global fleet has then also grown 10, 12% since then, we are sort of getting back to not quite the situation prior to the Red Sea crisis, but not far from it, which again was a situation where we had beginning overcapacity.